Hello, this is Elijah Logazar for a Forward Chess Moment, and today I'd like to discuss some games from Matthew Sadler and Natasha Reagan's Game Changer. Game Changer is about AlphaZero, a self-learning computer that taught itself to play chess using Google's algorithm and ended up crushing Stockfish in a long match. And one of the reasons why this is important is because AlphaZero is very good at chess dynamics, more so than any other engine, and applies ideas in a human-like way that can be learned from. So I'd like to go show two examples. So first of all, I'd like to show an example of how AlphaZero does not need to feel like it needs to justify sacrifices immediately. A lot of people will think that you give up material and you need to prove something now because otherwise you're going to be down material, and because you're down material, you will need some sort of tactical justification to prove that you'll get sufficient compensation for the material back in the short term. But that's not necessarily true, because long-term dynamics, there is long-term dynamic compensation in the sense that there is attacking possibilities in the long run or other sorts of initiative-based things that do not require immediate justification, as they aren't going away. So AlphaZero is very good at noticing this, and Stockfish, on the other hand, relatively speaking, was not, in the sense that it would often evaluate these sacrifices as favorable for the defender because it couldn't see a short-term attacking tactical justification for winning the material back by force or checkmate. So, whereas AlphaZero saw the long-term attacking prospects and would exploit these in the long run. This is also something that Grandmaster Jacob Agard recommends in his Attacking Manual 1, where he illustrates the flow of the attack as evolution, revolution, evolution, from the perspective of the revolution is the sacrifice that the sacrifice to break through, the pawn lever to break through, some sort of way for you to break through with your pieces, and the evolution is when you bring your pieces in the attack. And if you can improve the circumstances faster than your opponent, and the weakness isn't going away, there is no need to do the revolution immediately, whereas the computers will likely be looking for the revolution. AlphaZero is very good at continuing the evolution phase of the game, the improvement phase, without needing to justify its sacrifices, as long as the weaknesses aren't going away. Of course, if they are going away, you should strike now while you can. So I would like to explain the ideas mostly as what I learned from the book, but I don't want to read directly from the book. I do like this book very much and highly recommend it. This platform is also very convenient for studying it on, as you don't have to import the moves manually on a board. So AlphaZero sacrifices this f3 pawn, and it doesn't try to justify the sacrifice. It just continues developing, saying the g-file and the time I've gained will be more valuable than the pawn. I also have the bishop pair, which increases in value once there's more open lines. It also ignores the h2 pawn. It's playing consistently according to the dynamics of the position, and the extent that if you have a dynamic advantage, you should be playing for dynamics. You should be trying to increase your advantage there to exploit it, to push it closer to a tipping point of checkmate, in that regard. Whereas if you play passively after sacrificing, you might lose your initiative and are not playing consistently according to the advantage you have. You should not be afraid of sacrificing more material once you started sacrificing, but play for the advantages you already have. So, trying to increase them. And in this case, White increases his time and quality of position at the cost of material. And AlphaZero keeps improving his pieces, bringing them to the attacking zone. Note how the rooks are currently on the open files, and if the pawns are pushed, now dark square weaknesses would show up, and black is lacking a dark square bishop. So these weaknesses aren't going away. The king can't exactly evacuate from the king side, and White's superiority on the king side is also partially based on his space advantage in the open lines, so this positional advantage can allow for a long-term attacking prospects. The opponent, if they can't bring the defenders over to the king side easily, and if they could, they'd still be cramped and passive. Black's extra pawns, well, what's the advantage of an extra pawn from the static point of view? You're often able to turn it into a passed pawn and try to make it a queen, often in the endgame. But Black has no way to force exchanges, and trying to push the pawns in front of his king would increase White's attacking prospects by making weaknesses. But AlphaZero sees no need for immediate justification. It just makes improvements. It sees this is going to work in the long run, or at least be sufficient compensation in the long run, and slowly prepares to bring its pieces to the optimal squares for the attack and open more lines. it sees, from the general point of view, through statistical analysis actually, it played itself in millions and millions of games and came to general conclusions about types of positions through statistics, basically mimicking human pattern recognition, which is really interesting from my perspective. So it sees, from the general point of view, this sort of position will be sufficient compensation, and Stockfish sees, from the concrete point of view, I don't see a tactic for white, therefore black is better or at absolute least equal. But white just keeps improving. He maximizes the safety of his king. He's going to AlphaZero will later open the center, and now comes the pawn lever. If the exchange happens, now this bishop would be aimed at the pawn as well. Black avoids the opening lines. C5, another pawn lever trying to open lines. Again, how I mentioned how the revolution, the revolution phase of the game is for sacrifices, as Agar discusses, but I think the flow also includes pawn levers, because pawn levers are commitments that open the position for both players. So if you are able to improve your placement of your pieces faster than the opponent can without pawn levers, which would increase the speed of the position, you will get a better version of the pawn lever that will come later unless the opponent can prevent it. So note how it delays the pawn levers unless the opponent can prevent them until, as long as it can improve the pieces faster. And so now, because of the space advantage, it's able to go from flank to flank quickly. There's concrete reasons for the moves, obviously, but I'm not aware of all of the nuances that allow it to see precisely why it's going to be able to improve faster concretely, or precisely the concrete point of every one of the moves. But from the general point of view, I do see that black is restricted because of the space advantage and isn't able to play actively on the king side, where his majority is, because of the open lines, which would lead to attack against the black king, increasing in power. But this really illustrates, again, Agar's attacking principle, evolution, revolution, and then evolution, which is the idea that after you sacrifice, sometimes you can go back to the improving phase. You sacrifice now because there's or pawn lever now, because there's a temporary opportunity to open lines that would not be available if the opponent defended a certain resource, but you don't need to justify it immediately afterwards. You can go back to improving because you can improve faster than the opponent. The weakness has been created, the lines have been opened. And I'm really, really impressed by how well AlphaZero does this. The other engines are not able to apply Agar's attacking principles from at such a high level. Although once you think about it and you study when you study them, it should be like a truism how the dynamics function this way. But it's really hard to concretely apply sometimes, and it's doing it so well. The other engines are not able to do this in this way. So except possibly LuluZero, which is an engine that is self-learning also. It's based on AlphaZero's method, but not requiring a supercomputer, and it recently beat Stockfish in a super tournament for computers in a long match. So, and it seems to be very dynamic as well. So the lessons for AlphaZero might be available for the general public when studying computer games as well. And possibly people will be more open to the possibility of sacrifices and recognizing that dynamics, or long-term dynamics, are often sound, even with computer skepticism. So this move is one of the really impressive moves for me. E5, and then you don't recapture it. You wanted to open the lines. You didn't want to win the pawn back. If you take the pawn back, your bishop will be blocked. Now if black takes this pawn, white's bishop will be freed and opened, and the rook will be unblocked as well. Now black didn't go for this. Black pushed the pawn instead, saying your bishop will still be restricted. But white sees that he can have this lever later, so this ends up happening. And now all of white's pieces are active in the attack and very dangerous. Black never got to finish his development on the queen side. But where would the pieces go if they were going to develop? The knight was in the way, for one thing. So black tries to develop the knight, maybe to develop the bishop. So then this e5 resource became available. But otherwise white might have opened the c-file or tried a different lever, or I'm not completely sure of all of the exact concrete resources, but black is passive. He's not going to use the extra pawns anytime soon. He's trying to untangle, and in the meantime, white's pressure down the files, the bishop pair, the space advantage, will lead to sufficient compensation even if white doesn't find the best plan to build up the position further. But black trying to untangle allows concrete resources, increasing the dynamics, and I'd like to point out, now that this bishop is unblocked, it's not exactly safe for black to develop his light-scored bishop. Black now opens it, and white was willing to sacrifice the pawn. Again, he's sacrificing AlphaZero is sacrificing many pawns. Now, is black again. Is he able to use the open? Is he able to use the extra pawns from the perspective of statics? Well, he can't push past pawns. The extra pawn here is completely restricted in the center, and these pawns are restricted in the sense that black king would become under more danger. So black is unable to use his static advantage. But white is able to play for an attack and is still able to improve his pieces effectively. So AlphaZero continues the improvement phase, but now recognizes that his bishops were active, which was probably the main goal of many of the last many moves, wanting to include every piece in the attack, one of the core Agard principles again. So now white goes back and brings his queen and rooks back into the kingside attack. And this wasn't done earlier because the bishops were being priority and the opponent could not stop them from coming back quickly anyways. F3, again, opening lines. Now, white would probably have been able to win the F4 pawn by force and then target the knight through pins and whatnot, so Stockfish didn't want to go for that, but now this bishop was forced to retreat. It's no longer clogging the files. White's queen has the option of going on these two ranks, although that's not necessary. The rooks can come back, and the queen can come to c3 as well. White has these attacking resources, and black is still passive. The centralization was done instead. These sorts of resources that are coming here are useful if white's going to sacrifice on one of these pawn squares, but these squares are too well protected. Now, if black advanced the pawns, it would be more useful to go on these files directly. But now that the e file has been opened, white would like to use it. And the domination here is amazing. Well, I can't play the degree of incredible attacking technique that AlphaZero shows in terms of concrete understanding. At least I seem to be able to follow reasonably well due to this book and Agard's book, the general flow of dynamics that's happening. And white and black is still passive. White's winning some of the material back, but I think he's winning this material back at least partially just because he wants the open line still. Like, for instance, this pawn being gone, white might have the f4, f5 pawn lever to open lines further. So there was really no need to sacrifice, to try to justify the sacrifices earlier, because the positional advantages that allow for long-term dynamics weren't going away, so white instead prepares to increase his advantage through building moves, moves that improve his pieces closer to the attacking zone in regards to weaknesses, creation of weaknesses, pawn levers to open lines, and the flow is just brilliant because white was able to do so faster than black using the positional advantages. Because of his positional advantages. And concretely, black's position is falling apart. White can win a piece back here soon, but he could probably even improve the circumstances further, and black has to deal with moves like moving the queen out of the way, f4, f5, etc. And black decides to give back material because now the engine sees the tactics for white, which weren't necessary earlier, but white wasn't maximizing what he could get out of his pieces yet, and now white is. Since the lines will be opened, black's king's position is going to be falling apart. All of white's pieces will be included in the attack. Black sees tactics for white and ends up giving back material to supposedly survive. But at the end of the day, now white was the one with the material advantage and won the endgame. I found this game to be a brilliant example of chess dynamics in practice. So I'd like to illustrate another example where AlphaZero does not see the need to justify its sacrifice in the short term and manages to improve the circumstances faster than the opponent, whereas the supercomputer Stockfish fails to evaluate the position correctly and thinks it has an advantage for a long time, and then equality for a while, and then only realizes that it's lost at a very high depth once it's too late. The Porellia variation of the two knights defense. Not surprising that AlphaZero prefers black or plays back in this case, as he's the one getting the dynamic advantage. Black has open lines in this opening as well as a space advantage, and white's bishop and knight being targets, so black will have an advantage in time and in space. Also in quality of position in terms of, well, quality of position would summarize either of those. I'm putting that from Kasparov's theory being that chess advantages can be classified into three holistic groups: material, time, and quality of position. AlphaZero seems to prefer the second two in many cases, even when the other engines do not. So it wins against them when they misevaluate it. So knight d5. I don't want to get too much into the details of the nuance of the opening, but Black has a lead in development here. White's queenside is difficult to develop because the pawns are in the way, and Black has a space advantage in the center. Now, AlphaZero gives back a second pawn, but AlphaZero doesn't. Sorry, and Stockfish takes it, but AlphaZero does not see the need to immediately justify the sacrifice with tactics. It says, okay, you've just given me an open line, I'm going to use it for my bishop, now I'm going to also open my other bishop into the attack, and maybe my knight will come into the attack through the center. My rooks can be centralized, my queen can be brought to the king side. Can you bring your pieces to the attacking zone as fast as I can? Because I have open lines, I have lines of communication, where how will your bishop be included in the attack? Okay, your knight gets in the game, will it be isolated on its own? When attacking based on long-term advantages, the attacker is usually able to bring pieces in the attacking zone faster than the defender, because the defender would have to deal with tempo gainers due to threats, as well as the positional advantage allowing faster improvement. Black continues development, exchanges White's only active piece. Okay, technically this knight is also somewhat active and the rook is active, but White's most active piece. And here, Black decides to continue bringing pieces in the attack. Since the knight was exchanged, there are no defenders of the king side right now except for these pawns, and there's these bishops are pointed towards the opponent's king side. The bishops unopposed, pointed towards the enemy king, are known as Horowitz bishops, based on the game Wheelie versus Rubinstein, and have been used in many modern games since. It's a very important attacking motif, especially when combined with the queen or other attacking pieces. But Black just continues the evolution phase, bringing pieces into the attack, attacking the weakest point, and gives up a third pawn without needing to justify it either. But this move is possibly, in my opinion, the most impressive move of the game. And my reasoning for this is, many people would try to justify the sacrifice immediately, or they would see this position and they're like, I'm down 3 pawns, I don't have tactics, what am I supposed to do about this? But AlphaZero sees the long-term attacking potential. How will this knight get to the king side? It's too far, it'll take way too long. Maybe the rook will be included on the king side. Black will have a favorable ratio of attackers to defenders, the assault ratio, on the king side, and should be able to improve faster than White in that area. Now you have to calculate, can you improve faster than White regarding to the weaknesses? Now you can for now, but later, when you're considering possible sacrifices, you'll have to see, can the opponent defend this? Can the opponent bring pieces in to the defending zone fast enough to defend the weaknesses faster than I can bring attackers in regards to the weaknesses? You still have to calculate that, because at a certain point the opponent might be able to improve faster. And when that happens, you need to be ready to sacrifice, be ready to strike. For now at least, Black is able to improve faster. And so he does so. He provokes a weakness. AlphaZero provokes a weakness. And now the rook will be included in the attack. H6 is a really useful move, because now the rook is able to be included in the attack without fearing back rank mate, without committing the rook yet. It's the most flexible move, basically. And Stockfish basically resigns. Stockfish went from thinking that it had an advantage to thinking that maybe it's balanced because I don't see a tactic for Black, but I don't see how White can use material, to basically resigning, giving back the knight with a lost endgame, because the 3 extra pawns, the 3 pawns for the piece, are very bad pawns, in the extent that this pawn is doubled. Well, none of White's pawns are realistically going to become passed. And Black is very active. So after the exchange, Black ended up easily winning the endgame. But it's knight b5 was the critical move. But why would Stockfish just basically resign here? Well, at depth 37 or 38, it saw tactics for Black finally. Before that, it's saying 0.00. I've checked. I don't remember exactly if it was 37 or 38, but somewhere around there. And so Black now prevents queen g1. Taking would lead to concrete tactics because of the open king. Black would likely be able to just win the queen and possibly take on f3, winning back the material. And so now Black is able to bring the rook into the attacking zone. None of the pieces can be taken, and suddenly Black will have an enormous assault ratio regarding weaknesses, or at least sufficient to win with all the pieces in the attack. Morphy's lesson. So the book shows this, and queen takes f3 wins. the amazing idea behind h6 is shown by the king coming to king h7 here, but perfect application of evolution revolution in practice. This Black built up some positional advantage and sacrificed for it. Then it was the sort that allowed for long-term dynamics. Then it continues to sacrifice for increasing it, while not needing to prove itself immediately. Improves the circumstances by bringing pieces in the attacking zone faster than the defenders. Stockfish doesn't see the justification, and now it's too late. Now, why was Queen e1 played? Queen e1 was played because of the threat of bishop takes g3, f takes g3, queen takes g3. So it was defended, and now it's too much. White is unable to defend the weaknesses. If the queen moves anywhere else, that's not either g1 or e1, then bishop takes g3 takes, queen takes g3 will be checkmate. But if it doesn't, then queen takes h3, king takes h3, rook h5 will be checkmate also. And this can't be taken either, because queen takes f4, and the queen can't be taken obviously because of the pin. So trying to interfere with that by controlling the important square, now just interference, and it's impossible to stop. So this attacking idea is why Stockfish more or less resigned, but AlphaZero recognized that from the general point of view, resources like this might show up. Now, it doesn't need to see if it's going to show up or not. It's doing this partially through calculation and partially through statistics recognizing expected score based on type of position. And it sees, well, from the human point of view, you might not see a win. You might not see a win here either, and there might not be one. Maybe there's some concrete defensive resource. But you recognize that the opponent's completely on the defensive, and from the general point of view, such compensation should be enough to either A, win back the material by force, B, deliver checkmate, C, win back more than enough material by force due to the opponent giving back material to defend against concrete threats, or D, dominate the opponent who is unable to use his material advantage, and therefore, you don't need to see it all the way. You see the general compensation, you don't need to see all the way. AlphaZero was calculating some 100 times less variations than AlphaZero was, than Stockfish was, but it didn't need to see as many. It saw from the general, and then it calculated what it thought was relevant. So, but Stockfish needed proof. Stockfish sees material. I have certain attached weights for pawns. I'm up three pawns now. What is your compensation? Okay, the general compensation might not be evaluated high enough, and you can't evaluate it high enough from the formula point of view. You can't, because if from the formula point of view, you try to deconstruct it to what, an open file? Well, some open files are more valuable than others according to the weaknesses. You try to say, according to the assault ratio, well, maybe the opponent concretely will be able to reduce that in the near future, or concretely defend. Or the assault ratio matters not only in attackers to defenders in a certain area of the board, which it really does, but also in regards to the weaknesses and how effectively they're attacking and defending, because how are you supposed to formalize the defender for a computer? A human can recognize what the weaknesses are and see the attackers and defenders and how they attack it, but the computer might not recognize that, and you can't just give it a formulaic exact figure because it might just lead to a checkmating attack. How will that be measured? Or the opponent will give back material, might be worth something else because the opponent will give back material to defend against that, but that's based on the concrete tactics. It can't be just formulated. It's based on a general understanding that can be understood from the human point of view according to definitions by words. It can be understood from the pattern recognition point of view. It can be understood from the conceptual point of view, but you can't program a computer to just have a formula for it. But AlphaZero found, at least by the methods that Stockfish was using. Although they're trying to become more and more accurate with that and doing a decent job of that. AlphaZero's method, which artificially imitates human pattern recognition, was a lot more effective and was able to understand that from the general point of view this is sufficient, and black is playing for a win, and probably better, and using computer-like idea calculation was able to find the winning tactical idea once it got to that position. And AlphaZero won the endgame. White's pawns never got anywhere. I hope that you found this to be instructive. I highly recommend this book, Game Changer, especially in connotation with other attacking books like Agard's Attacking Manual 1, Attacking Manual 2, his Attack and Defense from the Grandmaster Preparation series, Danny Gormali's Mating the Castle King, and Lev Packus's Advanced Chess Tactics. AlphaZero is applying human ideas conceptually at a very high level, and this is not the only example I've seen this happening. It's all over the book, really. And I think that the forward chess platform is an excellent platform for this book, as it makes it a lot more convenient than going through the moves on a physical board, as they've already put the variations in for you, as well as having an engine that you're able to check and check a database as well.